Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. Unshaved, unbathed, unedited, but today, again, mostly scripted, and with good coffee. Have a slurp. I hope your week started off well and you're ready to roll up your sleeves and pitch into this battle. Yesterday, I was talking about a lot of the battles raging on Facebook regarding vote blue no matter who. And I guess the main reason for that is to make sure that you know what to say when you're having discussions with your traditional diehard blue dog Democrats. This article I've covered on the Bernie or Bust show before. I wrote it on August 20th, but we need to keep going over it. We can't let this rest. We need to keep pounding the main reasons why only Bernie can win. What the well-meaning liberals don't understand is that even if they prefer Elizabeth Warren, even if they had good reasons to prefer Elizabeth Warren, which we've spent hours debunking, there are no good reasons to vote for Elizabeth Warren. But even if there were, she still would lose to Donald Trump, guaranteed. And that seems to be the primary, well, that is a data-driven conclusion, is that Democrats in this election cycle care more about defeating Donald Trump. Almost 70% care more about defeating Donald Trump than any of their other single issues. So we need to show them why Elizabeth can't win in the general election and why Bernie is the only candidate who can. Professor Richard Wolff wrote a counterpunch article, and he made this observation. The U.S. working class was shocked 3 times in quick succession. First, the promise of rising standards of living was now definitively broken. Wages were flat, debt levels had reached unsustainable levels, and families and households were exhausted. Bernie talks about this all the time. The postponed reality of an American dream fading out of reach began to sink in. That's especially true of our young people now. Second, the working class watched Republicans and Democrats falling over one another in and after 2008 to give big finance and big business every possible taxing, spending, and regulatory support, mostly at taxpayer expense. Concerns about deficits, long a staple of conservatives, disappeared. The idea of boosting the economy from below disappeared as well. Everything was trickle-down economics, no matter how little trickled. As an example, millions of underwater homeowners were promised help that never arrived. The final blow came when, after trillions had been spent to revive a near-dead capitalist class, the problem of rising deficits was rediscovered to rationalize an austerity program for the masses. So we can have debts when it means military funding. We can have debts when it means bailing out the capitalists, but we don't have any. There's no. The only thing they say then when we are talking about helping the American people is, how are you going to pay for that? These 3 shocks proved too much for large sections of the U.S. working class. They expected little from Republicans, but felt betrayed by the Democrats. The Democrats could and should have stopped it, but the party was too weak or too embedded in the neoliberal status quo to be of any use. I don't think the party was weak. If they were weak, it was on purpose. It was to keep the neoliberal status quo going. The entire Washington apparatus, both parties, were jointly responsible. Right. That's the idea of controlled opposition that I've shared before. Working class anger against them, both parties, spilled over to the media that protected them by taking their lip services seriously rather than exposing and condemning their betrayals. So when the picket signs come out, when the pitchforks come out, when the guillotines come out, they all need to be aimed not only at the Washington apparatus politicians and judges and all including judges, but also at the media. The elitist media also need to be held accountable for their complicity. That's another article that I want to do in a future show, is about the way the media have been used over well, over centuries really, but over decades certainly, to hoodwink not only the American people but also people in Europe and other countries to believe that the hegemony that we have, the imperialism that we have from the United States as a superpower is acceptable. That's all coming to us through propaganda, and that's the corporate news outlets. Crystal ball. I have a clip here I have linked to in this article, and it's excellent. And I urge you to go to this article. I'll link to it in the information section. But go there and watch this whole clip. In this clip, she talks about a Twitter experiment she did. She was asking people, what's the difference between Warren and Sanders? And she wanted to know, if you're a Sanders supporter and can't stand Warren, or vice versa, could you tell me why? And then Irami Osei Frimpong said, labor. And I've been pounding on that point. The main difference between Warren and Sanders is how they view the labor force. Sanders wants to empower the labor force to democratize our whole system. He believes that democracy can't happen merely by voting, even though he doesn't come right out and say it that way. He encourages protests. He was encouraging us he's referred in some of his town hall meetings to Puerto Rico and how they have protested to overcome corruption. I think he's all about a real revolution, not just a voter revolution. And that's part of the evidence I have that that's how he feels about it. And the other is the way he thinks about unions. He wants to unionize the labor force and give them the power to stand behind him and take on the oligarchy, to take on the big banks, to take on the industrial complexes of military and police, and to go after pharmaceuticals, health insurance, all the central banks, all of the big money interests he talks about constantly. And so labor is one of the key issues that truly separates Warren and Sanders. Warren wants to redistribute through top-down bureaucracy, and she wants to talk the big boys into letting up a little bit on the working people. She wants to talk them into it. And Sanders wants to democratize political power. He wants to give actual power to the people, which is his slogan, which is the song that plays before he steps in front of his audiences. But it's real. That if you're not serious about empowering unions, then you're not serious about true revolution, truly giving the power and the benefits back to the United States workers. I've talked about this. I have the data for this, but I'm just going to tell it to you now and then look it up later. The American people are 400% more productive now than they were in 1950. 400%, 4 times more productive. So the question is, do they work a fourth as many hours, or do they receive 4 times as big of salaries as they did in 1950 in real dollars and today's dollars? And the answer is, of course not. Where is that 400% increase going? Where has it gone? Where is it still going? It's going right into the pockets of the oligarchs. And so Sanders really, truly wants to change that. And so do I, if you couldn't tell. According to recent polling from the Morning Consult, another main difference between Warren's voters and Sanders voters is that Warren's voters are more affluent, they're more wealthy, they're more educated, and so Sanders is a grubby populist. He appeals to the people who are hurting. And that's a big deal if you read the data-driven conclusions of Thomas Piketty, who wrote a best-selling book in 2013, Capital in the 21st Century. And for our interest, he wrote the paper, Brahmin Left versus Merchant Right, Rising Inequality and the Changing Structure of Political Conflict. And to boil that down, he's saying that this election cycle will come down to class warfare. It will come down to the way poor people and poorly educated people perceive things. They will not vote at all if there's not a candidate such as Bernie Sanders, or in their minds also Donald Trump is such a candidate, was a populist, was at least paying lip service to the needs of the poor and poorly educated, especially in battleground states. So it's interesting that a lot of the people that like Bernie also could vote for Trump for the same reasons. Elizabeth Warren is not appealing to the poor and poorly educated. So in a general election, she won't be able to draw on that base to be a suitable adversary to Donald Trump. But Bernie can draw on that base, and that's a big difference. The youth have been suffering. I'm a college professor, so I'm teaching students who are going into debt at an alarming rate. It alarms them even. It used to be students didn't pay much attention to their student loan debt. They just kind of deferred thinking about it the way they defer their student loan payments. But the days of not thinking about student loan debt are over because it's crippling our young people. And that's not the only scam against young people. Our youth are, especially our minority youth, are being treated horribly. They're not being viewed as a social investment, but as suspects. They're being put into prison. They're not healthy. They're not being able to get a good education. They don't have good food and housing. We have failed our children. We have failed democracy itself. That's a paraphrase of Henri A. Giroux. I don't know if he actually says his name that way, but it's French, so I said it like that. So only Sanders is really appealing to the youth, and his numbers show that. He is giving the message to the youthful people and to the other people in poverty and in difficult situations that he gives a shit. He gives a shit about people who are struggling. And that's one message that Elizabeth Warren will never be able to deliver because she doesn't. And neither do the people who are behind her that are clearly trying to get her to shift the Bernie voters away and even Biden voters away and to line up behind the candidate that the oligarchs can accept. And Elizabeth Warren, increasingly, it's becoming clear that they can accept her as a substitute for Bernie because she's only paying lip service. She's only imitating Bernie to try to steal his votes. And we've all known that. The diehard Berners have known that since 2016 when she didn't endorse him. So we all already were suspicious. And so some of us have been sleuthing. Yesterday we talked about Elizabeth Warren's daughter being in bed with the health insurance industry and the Working Families Party endorsement of Elizabeth Warren being crooked as all get out. The wheels are coming off of her bus. We can see that too in the way she said that she wouldn't take big money. She's taking PAC money from big money donors from her Senate race and putting it directly into her presidential race. I saw somebody say that Bernie Sanders is taking money. He took money from his Senate race, but that money was raised through small dollar donations. Elizabeth's Senate money was raised through big PACs and dark money and all kinds of not populist sources. And she's trying to make it, or somebody in her campaign is trying to make it sound like it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. That would be another article. All right, so I'm gonna skip the rest. I'm gonna show you the headlines here. Bernie's appeal to black voters, Cornel West's brilliant summation of why Bernie is more closely aligned with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X than any Democrat ever has been, or any Republican, obviously. And then we talk about that. There's a pretty good clip from Black Coffee. I didn't know about them before I wrote this article. And Bernie or bust, and Bernie or Trump combined and their effect in swing states. We really have to get that message out to the traditional liberal Democrats. And yesterday I spent the whole time talking about vote blue no matter who, so I'll refer you to that episode to talk about that point. If the mainline Democrats who care more about victory than ideology can see the writing on the wall in time, they may be able to shift their support before rather than after the primary process. Either way, there is but one conclusion that can be reasonably drawn. Only Bernie Sanders can defeat Donald Trump. We have to keep bringing this message out. I just found out Facebook will not allow people to go from links to the Bernie or Bust show from Facebook directly to YouTube. They just reroute you to your homepage, so you can't even get there. So there's a blockade. Facebook already doesn't like the topic of Bernie or Bust. In some of my posts that are links, they have banned those links. So I get my account locked up when I try to post links to the Bernie or Bust show. So I'm already on their blacklist. So whatever you can do to help would be greatly appreciated in sharing this video. So keep going with your awesome epic week and keep on burning.